One of the top targets is announcing his decision next week.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Friday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my 6th year covering U of L, 4th year hosting this show, and I want to take the time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Don't forget to leave a comment in the YouTube section below, because as you all know, that's a great way to help the show continue to grow. It is much appreciated. We had our football weekly mailbag on yesterday's show. On today's episode, it is all about the basketball questions. Questions about one of the top targets on the board for the Louisville Cardinals, Colben Landrew. He is announcing his decision next week. We'll discuss who Louisville is going toe-to-toe with in this recruitment, and we'll kind of talk about recruiting in general. How much of the focus for next year's roster will be on the portal? What about overpaying for certain high school prospects? We'll answer those questions throughout the duration of the show. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. On this football bye week, I thought it was appropriate to have two weekly mailbags. Had Grant Mulligan on the show yesterday to answer the football questions, so go check that out if you haven't already. But today, we've got some pretty intriguing basketball questions. And the first one is, what is the update on Coleman Landrew? And it's funny that you ask that because we got word recently, Rivals reported this, that Colben Landrew, 2026 recruit, will be announcing his decision on Wednesday, October 15th. For those who don't know, today is October 10th, so that is next week that we will find out the answer from one of the top targets on Louisville's recruiting board. The Cardinals have prioritized Colben Landrew, who is a borderline five-star prospect, top 30 prospect in the class, one of the better shooting guard / small forward hybrids, a wing, if you will, in the country, one of the best players in the state of Georgia. And when the Cardinals offered him back in the late summer, if you remember the episode when we discussed that, I mentioned that I was a huge fan of his game. I don't think he is an especially flashy player, but he's a guy that does so many things really well. Solid on-ball defender, operates effectively off ball on offense. The shooting efficiency is there, and he's growing more and more as a primary ball handler, primary initiator of the offense. And I mean, this guy, sky's the limit for this guy. Is he a one and done prospect? I don't necessarily think so. I think he's more so in that two and done build, which honestly, I like even more for Louisville's standpoint because of the possible continuity that you could have on your roster. But anyway, back to the decision. Colben Landrew is down to 6 schools: Louisville, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Purdue, Texas A&M, and UConn. Now, of course, recruiting changes like the wind. This might not necessarily be true the closer we get to the decision, but it's been this way for at least the past week. Seems like a battle between the Louisville Cardinals and the UConn Huskies. You got to feel good about where Louisville has been sitting with Landrew. Landrew made an official visit to campus a couple weeks ago, but he visited stores last weekend. And all reports suggest that that was a very successful visit for Dan Hurley's Huskies. And now that the commitment date is announced, you kind of read between the lines here, and it's like, man, like I guess I could see one of two things being true. Number one, the visit with UConn went so well that he's ready to make his decision to UConn. Or number two, he made his decision to UConn, didn't really think that it surpassed what he saw from Louisville. Those were the two schools he was considering the most, and he's ready to make his decision to Louisville. I mean, that is probably has to be one of those two. Now, granted, I believe that my intuition is pointing me that it's going to be number one, rather than number 2. So obviously things change. Things can change up to decision day. Things can change in the 11th hour. It's probably pretty difficult to recruit against UConn considering that they have the NIL package figured out, but they also have the championship experience, right? Dan Hurley, national championship head coach. It's going to be a tough sell against UConn in that regard, but Louisville is fighting. Is this going to be a situation where the Cardinals have to overpay to get Colben Landrew? I think that that's very possible, but no real inside information from me. And I'm not going to sit here and proclaim to be an insider if I truthfully just don't know. Like, I hear secondhand stuff, but nothing I'm comfortable with sharing. Outside of, it seems like the Huskies have made up a ton of ground. They are the team that's trending. And if you asked me on October 10th where I thought Coleman Landrew was going to end up, I would tell you that he ends up in the Northeast playing for Dan Hurley. That is just my gut feeling. Now, hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully Pat Kelsey and company end up triumphant in this battle. But Louisville, UConn duking it out at the moment. Second question. Outside of Coleman Landrew, or even if he were to go to UConn or another school, who would then be the top target? I mean, of course, the options are going off the board, right? I think at the moment, if it wasn't Colben Landrew, Josh Irving would probably be the quote-unquote top target. He's the 4-star center that seemingly at the moment is down between Louisville and Texas A&M, possibly. Of course, he's going to be at Big Blue Madness at Kentucky. We'll see how serious the Wildcats are in that recruitment. But currently, and I feel like I keep having to say currently is because in this new era of recruiting, things change so quickly. And a lot of it depends on who's going to offer the most money and how important is being the top bidder for a certain recruitment. Most of the time, it means a ton. Other times, special situations, it's a matter of the fit and the coaching staff and the tradition, and the list goes on. But I think Josh Irving is definitely a top target. Outside of him, you would have to imagine Anthony Felici, 4-star wing from Utah. Jackson Richardson, he's supposed to be on campus, I believe, middle November. Jackson Richardson, 5-star wing from Miami. Those are the three that I imagine would then rise up the board, even if Coleman Landrew were to commit to Louisville. Now, maybe that affects how they recruit the wing position, but I still think you could have a recruiting class with Landrew and Felici, with Landrew and Richardson. But do the Cardinals see it that way? Not sure. But this question is pertaining to the hypothetical that Landrew is either off the board, going to a different school, or just talking about who else is a top target. So those three would be included in that answer. Outside of that, Deron Rippey Jr. at the moment, it feels like the Cardinals are trying to get back in that recruitment, but not sure if they're going to be successful. Are they trying? Yeah, I would imagine so. Is he the top target? You kind of go based upon the actions of the coaching staff, right? Like who they are going to visit, who they're bringing in to visit. And if Rippey doesn't announce another visit to Louisville, he's already been to U of L once, and probably multiple times. He's been to U of L once for an official visit. If he doesn't announce that he's visiting Louisville again, I wouldn't put too much stock into it. So Irving, Felici, and Richardson would be the three that I would currently highlight. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about how the Cardinals are hypothetically going to construct the 2026-2027 roster in relation to this 2026 high school recruiting class. And I think that most of the focus is truly going to be on the transfer portal. I'll explain. You're Locked On Louisville, covering your team every day. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For the Louisville Cardinals, Chris Bell delivered in a huge way. Even though the Cardinals didn't win the game, Chris Bell was unstoppable. Over 100 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. He was truly unstoppable. And if you've been watching week after week, you know this performance isn't a fluke. He's on a streak. And just like Chris Bell delivered for the Cardinals, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash Streaks. You save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season long, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period is good through November 18th. And while I have you, the next slate of football games are up on FanDuel for tomorrow and Sunday. And if you're new, you can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Something that I'm going with on Saturday. I like to do these college football money line parlays, but I think I'm going to go with a two-teamer this week. Alabama money line on the road over Missouri, and Oregon money line against Indiana. That is my two-leg parlay that I'm going to put in. Of course, do your research and come to your conclusion. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the app today and join me and get started on all of the football opportunities. Thank you all so much for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville free and available on all streaming services, including YouTube and now TikTok 5 days a week, your team every day. Be sure to give us that follow on TikTok if you use that app. And also, get us a like on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. It definitely is appreciated. Next question. I had a couple questions that were relating to this, but primarily we're going to condense it to this. Will the Louisville Cardinals primarily use the portal to construct next season's roster? Of course, we are not even into this season, but with high school recruiting getting closer and closer to signing day and whatnot, it is a valid question. Like, you have to focus on next year's roster. And I'm going to start by taking a look at who could be returning. Let's play the numbers game. Now, just because they can return, assuming players are going to return is a very dangerous game in this new era of college sports. But the players who either can or, we'll go into the players who can. The players who can return: Kenai Roots, Adrian Woolley, Muhammad Kamara, Sananda Fru, Evangelist Zugris, also Michael Brown Jr. Michael Brown Jr. is not coming back. He is a one and done. That was already set in stone. Barring something completely unexpected, I would say there's about a 98.9% chance Michael is a one and done and goes to the NBA draft. So you got 5 players. And I do think that Woolley ends up coming back. I think that he's going to play a key part for this team, but I think his junior season, he's going to take over as that top-level scoring option. So assuming the players that can come back do come back outside of Michael, you've got 5 players: Roots, Woolley, Kamara, Fruit, and Zugris, most pertaining to the front court. But anyways, that's 5 players. Now, I would imagine that the roster is going to be anywhere from 12 to 13 players deep. I know that you can have 15 players, but just like this season, I don't think Louisville does that. So at this point, you have 7 to 8 more spots. You know that the Cardinals are likely going to go back to the international waters to bring in a player or two. I have it slotted for anywhere from 1 to 3 players. They brought in 3 international guys this season. I would imagine it's probably going to be in that 1 to 3 range. So let's call it 2, right? Let's meet in the middle. So there you have 7 players. And at that point, you're going to have to fill the remaining 5 to 6 spots probably with the portal predominantly. Now, here's the thing. That's not even considering that Louisville could end up with a commitment from one of the players in the group that we just talked about: Landrew, Richardson, Felici, Irving. Also included could be a possible reclass. It could be a player that they end up pivoting to that we don't know about currently. It could be a guy that ends up decommitting due to a coaching change in the spring and ends up coming to Louisville. CC, Kenai Roots. So regardless, using the portal for next season, I would imagine that this question is sort of slated towards the argument between high school recruiting and portal recruiting. And I don't think it's going to be close. I think at this point, the majority of the remaining spots are going to be filled via the portal. Now, I will say this. I do think there has to be some sort of a balance, because the teams that just primarily use high school recruiting to build their roster, they don't really succeed at a high level. Same can be said for teams that just strictly use the portal and they rotate guys in and out every single offseason. You don't see a ton of sustained success with those programs either. Now, you're seeing programs kind of do away with both of those mentalities and go to more of a balanced approach. And you look to the Final Four this past year. Duke, of course, you're led by Cooper Flagg. Houston, Florida. Who is the other Final Four team? Auburn? I think it was Auburn. Those four teams utilized the transfer portal. But there was also a level of player development that was key. Houston, really known for developing guys. Now, they did bring in some key transfers. Same thing with Florida. Developing guys and bringing in your go-to guy with Walter Clayton. And also another starter in Elijah Martin. Duke, high-level high school recruits, but also guys that came back, guys that they brought in. And then Auburn had probably the oldest roster in college basketball, but transfers, guys that they developed. It's a mixture, and that's kind of where I'm like, I don't want to completely disregard any aspect of roster building, because I think that there has to be a level of continuity, but in the same discussion, you also have to give your team the best chance to succeed that season. So it's that give and take. How do you compete at the highest level this year while also trying to keep as much of continuation with your roster in mind? So with that comes this particular aspect of roster building, to where do you think that Louisville goes into that 25 to 50 range more and tries to find more options that they can develop? I personally think that that's what they're doing with the international recruiting, because Zougaras, Fruit, and Kamara have multiple years of eligibility, and these are guys that we are projecting to be back for 2026, 2027. And I don't really care if you bring them in via the high school recruiting class, via the international recruiting class, as long as you bring in players that you believe can be developed, and ultimately, maybe it's not this year and perhaps it might not even be next year, but at some point in their career, they are going to play significant minutes and have a distinguished role within this team and within this rotation. That's all you can ask for. So, again, it's looking different at the moment. You could go to the portal and also do that, right? Go get a player that might not be happy with their current situation, but he also might not necessarily play next season. Now, here is also another issue, is operating with that mentality isn't always successful, because we're seeing it all over the country in every sport, that if a player's not playing significantly right away, there is a sizable chance that that player leaves, because there's going to be someone tampering, someone in their ears saying, hey, look, you can come play 25, 30 minutes a game for us next season. And if Pat Kelsey's saying, well, you're still going to be a fringe rotation player, it's easier said than done to develop players on your roster, because there's no guarantee that they're going to stay. And that's where, coaches have to just earn their contract, right? You re-recruit your roster every single season. And that's why it's dangerous to automatically assume that all the players that could be back outside of Michael will be back. And I know that that's a long way around to answering this question, but I do think that Louisville is primarily using the portal to fill top needs for this reason. And We're going to answer one question in the next segment that has really been the topic of discussion with this Cardinals fan base, and that's whether or not the Cardinals need to start overpaying for top high school prospects. I have an interesting stance on that, and I'll explain what that is when we come back on the final segment. You're Locked On Louisville, covering your team every day. This episode is brought to you by Mazda's moving the game forward for those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, they move culture, and keep moving the game forward. This week's moment that moved the game forward was Chris Bell. Really not just one play, although you can single out his great touchdown grab in the second half. But Chris Bell showed that nobody on that Virginia defense could guard him. Over 100 receiving yards, finding the end zone for the Cardinals. They just kept moving forward, going for it no matter what. And hey, I applaud his effort. When you follow what moves you, like Chris did just that, the unexpected is only the beginning. Just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Card Nation, we're going to come back next week and, of course, preview the upcoming matchup against Miami. There will be a crossover episode between myself and the Locked On College basketball host Isaac Shade to give a preview into the Louisville basketball season. We are now 2 weeks away, 2 weeks on the dot away from the opening exhibition game against Kansas. It's getting so close, and I'm super excited for year 2 under Pat Kelsey. But to conclude this week, we are going to answer probably the main question that has dominated discussion over the past couple of weeks, because we haven't really had basketball to talk about. It's mainly basketball recruiting, and what we've seen, unfortunately, are top targets going elsewhere. Taylon Kinney goes to Kansas. Tyron Stokes is not coming to Louisville. Other players involved. And this also kind of happened last cycle, and Taylon Kinney goes to Kansas because Kansas drops a Godfather offer that he couldn't refuse. Louisville seemingly isn't comfortable reaching that high dollar threshold for Tyron Stokes. So I would say one of the questions, this was a question that was asked most, does Louisville need to start overpaying for top high school players? I don't think the answer is clear-cut. My short answer is that the Cardinals have to pick and choose their battles. They have to pick and choose when to do this, because I think that in some situations the answer should be yes. In other situations, the answer is, I'd rather go to the portal. Now, here's the thing. We've seen in this, 18-month stretch since Pat Kelsey's been at Louisville, that the Cardinals, when they have strong valuations for players, they don't usually like to go over those. Now, they have won some bidding wars. They outbid Tennessee for Isaac McNeely. They won the Adrian Woolley recruitment. Right? I mean, they've won some pretty solid recruitments, Ryan Conwell. But the thing is now is with some other recruitments, we're seeing it. When it's gotten to a bidding war, the Cardinals have kind of held firm. They've drawn a line in the sand. They say, you know what? We value this recruitment at X amount of dollars, and we're not going to go over that number. And if we do, it's going to be very minimally. And that's infuriated some fans. It's also comforted other fans in showing that Pat Kelsey is extremely calculated. They are constructing this roster very meticulously. They're not operating with, just operating on a whim, if you will. And they are really sitting down saying, you know what, we are trying to budget it this way. Because, look, when NIL became a thing, the Cardinals did have some benefits and advantages, if you will, because they got creative. Now, other teams have entered that realm, and yes, revenue sharing is in effect. Yes, Louisville does have a good NIL base, but it's pretty clear that other teams have more money. Other teams have more alumni backing. Other teams have more corporate backing. I wish UPS and some of these other big corporations in Louisville would help the Cardinals out more, but anyways, that's just seemingly not happening. So the Cardinals have to pick and choose their battles. They can't go out there and overpay for every single player. Like the conversation was, do you have the money to be able to overpay for Tyron Stokes and also be able to fill out a roster that's going to be competitive around him? Now, again, the fallback has been, well, if you're going after these top players in the high school ranks and you aren't successful in landing them, you're just going to go to the portal. Now, two things. Number one, I think that the Michael Brown Jr. recruitment was very unique because I think that I have a strong feeling, of course, I don't have the confirmation, but I have a strong feeling that he didn't get paid what other top 10 prospects got paid. And of course, Adidas helped out with this as well. And the second part of this is that relying solely on the portal to fill these needs can be successful. And we've seen that the past two off seasons, but what we've also seen is how inflated that the portal gets. Because you might have valuations at certain marks, but the market is decided by the demand. And I'm interested to see now with revenue sharing. I would imagine that roster retention is going to be more critical because you have that revenue sharing involved. Like you're going to be able to lock up your top players for next season. So what that means in turn is that there's going to be less options. I'm not saying that there's going to be a scarcity, but there's going to be less options than there has been in years past. So less options equals higher demand. Higher demand equals higher asking prices. Is Louisville willing to not pay the asking price for a top high school guy now and then risk having to pay significantly more for a top portal player because the market's all over the place? Not saying that that's going to be the case, but you saw it this year how top portal guys got some high dollar NIL deals. Granted, the Cardinals handed out a couple of those deals, but some players got paid even more than that. So if you go to the portal next year and you need 4 to 5 players, but those 4 to 5 players, you need them to be like your go-to guys, you're going to be forking over a good amount of money. So are you comfortable with going with experience over unproven talent? It's just, you see what I'm saying? Like there's not like a certain answer. I think that I think it comes down to picking and choosing battles. Like I think that there has to be a balance. If you are wanting to recruit the top 25 players, you have to understand that more often than not, these recruitments are going to turn into bidding wars. And I also understand standing firm with valuations, but if you do that and you scoff at every bidding war, eventually you're not going to have a player and you're going to miss out on everyone. So that's why I'm saying you have to pick and choose your battles. Am I okay with overpaying for the whole roster? Of course not. Am I okay with overpaying for 1 to 2 players that you really believe that you could build with? 1,000,000% I'm okay with that. And of course, it goes without saying that I trust Pat Kelsey and company to be able to navigate those waters because they've shown that there is a direction to what they're doing. They are very meticulous and methodical. It's calculated how their approach is. So I am choosing to believe that even though it's discouraging seeing top players that you are involved with go elsewhere a good amount this cycle, I'm still choosing to believe in Pat Kelsey and the staff. So to answer the question, I think Louisville has to pick and choose their battles on when to overpay and when not to overpay. So far, it seems like they've done that. But that is going to wrap up this Friday edition of the show. Everyone have a great week. Have a great week relaxing during the bye week, and we'll see you back here on Monday. Go Cards.